I'm Michael Carter, 42, and for 15 years I believed I was living the perfect life. 4 beautiful children, a devoted wife, and the kind of family that neighbors envied. Then, on a Tuesday evening that started like any other, my wife Sarah looked me in the eyes and shattered everything with 8 words. None of them are actually yours, Michael. The room went silent except for the sound of my heart breaking. But it wasn't just the betrayal that destroyed me. It was discovering who the real father was, the man I'd trusted most. The man who'd been at every birthday party, every holiday dinner, every milestone moment of our children's lives. What I uncovered next about our marriage, our finances, and the web of lies that had been carefully constructed around me would change not just my life, but the lives of everyone I thought I knew. If you've ever questioned the foundation of everything you believed in, you'll want to hear this story. The children's birth certificates lay scattered across the coffee table, where Sarah had thrown them in her desperate attempt to explain. Emma Rose Carter, born March 15, 2008. Marcus David Carter, born August 3, 2010. Sophie Ann Carter, born November 12, 2012. Jacob Michael Carter, born January 8, 2016. Documents I'd treasured, each one marking a moment when I'd become a father again. Now they felt like evidence of an elaborate fraud. My hands were shaking as I picked up Jake's certificate. I remembered signing it, my signature shaky with emotion and exhaustion after 36 hours of labor complications. I'd been so proud to give him my middle name. Sarah had insisted on it, said it would make me feel more connected to our youngest. Now I understood why she'd pushed so hard for that symbolic gesture. Guilt, probably. Michael, please sit down. Let me explain. Sarah's voice sounded hollow, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. She was perched on the edge of our leather sofa, the one we'd bought to celebrate my promotion to partner at the construction firm. Even that felt tainted now. How much of our life had been built on Tom's money, Tom's generosity, Tom's children? Explain what exactly? I could barely recognize my own voice. Explain how you've been lying to me for 15 years? Explain how my best friend has been... I couldn't finish the sentence. The words felt too poisonous to speak aloud. It wasn't supposed to happen. It just did. The oldest, most pathetic excuse in the book. Sarah was wrapping her arms around herself, rocking slightly. You were working so much those first few years? 70-hour weeks trying to build the business with Tom. I was alone with Emma, and she was such a difficult baby. Colic, never sleeping. Tom would come by to check on us when you were on job sites. Check on us. Like we were his responsibility. When did it start? I forced myself to ask, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. 2 years after we were married. Emma was 8 months old. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. It was just once, Michael. I swear it was just supposed to be once. But then what? You accidentally kept having his children for the next 14 years? She flinched like I'd slapped her. Marcus wasn't planned. None of them were planned after Emma. But when I found out I was pregnant again, and then again I knew they had to be Tom's. The timing. I laughed. But there was no humor in it. So you've known this whole time? Every birth, every first step, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference, you knew they weren't mine. You love them, she said desperately. You're their father in every way that matters. Biology doesn't change that. But it did change things. It changed everything. The law would see Tom as their father. Insurance companies would see Tom as their father. And worst of all, some part of me was already wondering if Tom might actually be a better father. He certainly had more money. More patience. The kids always lit up when Uncle Tom walked through the door. Uncle Tom, Jesus Christ, does he know? I asked. Sarah nodded miserably. He's always known. That's why he's been so involved, why he set up those education funds, why he insisted on being their godfather. Not their godfather, their father. I stood up abruptly, needing to move, needing to do something with the energy coursing through my body. Upstairs, I could hear Sophie laughing at something on her tablet. Tomorrow was Saturday, which meant pancakes and cartoons and the kind of easy family morning I'd looked forward to all week. Now I didn't know how I'd look at any of them without seeing Tom's features staring back at me. I need you to call him, I said finally. I need Tom to come over here tonight. Michael, no. You're upset. Maybe we should wait. Call him, Sarah, or I will. But one way or another, all 3 of us are going to sit in this room and figure out what happens next, because whatever life we'd been living, it was over now. The only question was, what would rise from the ashes? I found myself driving aimlessly through our neighborhood, past houses where normal families were probably settling in for normal Tuesday evenings. The college friendship photo tucked in my wallet seemed to burn against my chest. Tom and me at graduation, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning like we owned the world. We'd been roommates for 3 years, best man at each other's weddings, business partners for over a decade. The photo represented everything I'd believed about loyalty and trust, now crumbling like old paper. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "He's coming over at 9. Please come home." I pulled into a gas station parking lot and just sat there, engine running, trying to piece together 15 years of memories through this new, horrible lens. Tom had always been part of our story. Hell, he'd introduced me to Sarah at a college party. She was his friend from high school who'd transferred to our university junior year. I'd fallen for her immediately, but Tom had stepped aside, claiming he wasn't interested in settling down. Now I wondered if that had been the plan all along. The business we'd built together started during our senior year with a single renovation project. Tom had the connections. His family owned a small construction company, and I had the ambition. We'd been the perfect partnership, or so I'd thought. He handled the financial side while I managed operations and crews. Looking back, I realized how often he'd insisted on handling contracts alone, claiming I was better with the hands-on work. Those frequent visits to check on Sarah and the babies now made sickening sense. Tom lived alone in a downtown condo, claimed he was married to his work, but he'd spend weekends at our house, helping with projects, playing with the kids. Uncle Tom, who remembered every birthday, every school play, every little league game. Uncle Tom, who'd set up college funds for each child without me even asking. Uncle Tom, who'd quietly become more involved in their daily lives than some biological fathers ever were. I thought about Emma's birth, how Tom had paced the hospital waiting room right alongside me. How he'd been the first person besides medical staff to hold her, tears in his eyes like he was looking at his own daughter. Because he was. He'd known it all along, and I'd been too trusting, too grateful for his friendship to question why my best friend was so emotionally invested in my children. The memories kept coming. Tom teaching Marcus to ride a bike because I'd been stuck on a job site. Tom at Sophie's first dance recital, recording everything on his phone. Tom carrying Jake on his shoulders at the county fair, both of them laughing at some private joke. All those moments I'd thought showed what a wonderful friend looked like were actually a father spending time with his children while the fool who thought they were his work to support them. When I finally returned home, Sarah was waiting in the kitchen, her eyes red from crying. She'd made coffee, as if this were some normal social visit instead of the conversation that would destroy our marriage and possibly our family. "I need you to tell me everything," I said, sitting across from her at the table where we'd shared thousands of meals. From the beginning. All of it. Sarah's hands wrapped around her mug like she was trying to warm herself. The affair started when Emma was 8 months old. You were working the Henderson project, remember? Those 18-hour days for 6 weeks straight. I was exhausted, overwhelmed. Tom would stop by after work to check if I needed anything, and one thing led to another, I said bitterly. It wasn't like that. We talked. About everything. About how lonely I was, how much pressure you were under trying to establish the business. Tom listened in ways you couldn't because you weren't there. So this is my fault? No! She reached across the table, but I pulled my hand away. It's my fault, all of it. But Michael, it was never supposed to continue. After that first time, we both agreed it was a mistake. But then Marcus happened, and Sophie and Jake. You kept sleeping with him for 14 years, Sarah. Not continuously. It would stop for months, sometimes a year. But then something would happen, we'd be alone, and a knock at the front door interrupted her confession. Tom had arrived. Tom walked into our living room like he owned it, which maybe he did. His confidence faltered when he saw my expression, but only for a moment. Even now, facing the destruction of our friendship, he carried himself with that easy assurance that had made him successful in business and, apparently, in stealing my family. Sarah called, he said simply, taking a seat in the armchair he'd claimed as his own over the years. She told me, you know. The business partnership agreement sat on the coffee table between us. I'd pulled it from our home office before he arrived. 23 pages of legal language that I'd signed 10 years ago, trusting Tom to handle the details. Now, reading it with new eyes, I could see how cleverly he'd positioned himself as the senior partner, despite my operational expertise being what actually drove our success. How long have you been planning this? I asked. Planning what? But Tom couldn't quite meet my eyes. Don't play dumb. The business structure. The way you've woven yourself into our family. The college funds. The house renovations you insisted on paying for. This didn't just happen, Tom. You orchestrated it. He leaned back, finally showing his true colors. You want to know the truth? Fine. I never stopped loving Sarah. When she chose you in college, I stepped aside because I thought it was temporary. But then you married her and I had to watch my girl become your wife. Your girl? The phrase made my stomach turn. We had history, Michael. Real history. I introduced you because I thought you'd date for a few months and move on. I never expected you to propose. Sarah was standing in the doorway, her face pale. Tom, stop. This isn't helping. Helping what? Tom's voice rose. We've been living a lie for 15 years. Those kids upstairs, they're mine. Biologically, financially, emotionally, I've been more of a father to them than you ever were. I raised them. I stood up, hands clenched into fists. With my money. Tom's words hit like physical blows. The business barely broke even for the first 5 years. How do you think you afforded this house, their private school, Sarah's car? I've been subsidizing your entire lifestyle. You son of a... Check the books, Michael. Really look at them. Every major expense for this family has come through me. The renovation loan for this house? I co-signed. The kids' college funds? All mine. Sarah's been receiving monthly payments from my personal account for 8 years. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Monthly payments? Sarah stepped into the room. Michael, I can explain. She's been on my payroll, Tom continued, his voice gaining strength. Officially listed as a business consultant. $2,500 a month for family liaison services. The humiliation was complete. Not only had my wife been sleeping with my business partner, but I'd been unknowingly living off his charity while he played house with my family. I want you out, I said quietly. Out of this house, out of the business, out of our lives. Tom smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That's not how this works, Michael. Those children need their real father, and I'm not going anywhere. In fact, my lawyer will be calling you tomorrow about establishing formal custody arrangements. Your lawyer? Did you really think I wouldn't prepare for this day? I've been documenting my relationship with Emma, Marcus, Sophie, and Jake for years. School events, medical appointments, financial support, it's all recorded. In the eyes of the law, I'm their father in every way that matters. He stood to leave, pausing at the door. You can fight this, but you'll lose everything. The business, the house, the kids. Or you can be reasonable, and maybe we can find a way for everyone to move forward. After he left, the silence in our house felt different. Poisoned, owned by someone else. The DNA test kit sat unopened on my kitchen counter for 3 days. A small cardboard box that represented both my last hope and my greatest fear. I knew what the results would show, but some part of me needed the scientific confirmation before I could fully accept that the children I'd raised, loved, and considered my own weren't biologically mine. Margaret Walsh had been practicing family law for 25 years, and her expression told me she'd seen cases like mine before. Her office was lined with legal texts and family photos, a reminder that even lawyers dealing with broken families still believed in the institution. Mr. Carter, I need you to understand the harsh realities of paternity law in this state, she said, sliding a legal pad across her mahogany desk. Biology matters a lot. If Mr. Harrison can prove biological paternity and demonstrate ongoing financial and emotional support, he has strong grounds for custody claims. But I've been their father for 15 years, I protested. I signed their birth certificates, attended every parent-teacher conference, coached Marcus's baseball team, all of which will be considered. But the law favors biological parents who can demonstrate active involvement. From what you've told me, Mr. Harrison has been present in their lives consistently. Margaret's pen tapped against her notepad as she outlined the grim possibilities. In custody disputes involving disputed paternity, courts often award significant time to biological fathers, especially when they can prove financial support. Mr. Harrison's documentation of school events, medical decisions, and financial contributions creates a compelling case. The business implications were even worse. Tom had structured our partnership agreement to give him controlling interest in any dispute requiring dissolution. What I'd seen as generous terms, allowing me to focus on operations while he handled finances, now looked like a trap 15 years in the making. He can force a buyout, Margaret explained. And based on the valuation methods written into your agreement, you'd receive significantly less than the business is actually worth. He also has grounds to claim ownership of client relationships and ongoing contracts. So he gets my business and my children? Not necessarily. The psychological parent doctrine does provide some protection. Courts recognize that biological connection isn't the only factor in determining a child's best interests. Your 15 years of active parenting carries weight. I thought about Emma, who'd called me when she had her first heartbreak. Marcus, who still crawled into bed with Sarah and me during thunderstorms even though he was 14. Sophie's elaborate bedtime ritual that only worked when I read the stories. Jake, who'd learned to walk by taking his first steps toward me. What are my options? Margaret outlined a strategy that would require documenting everything, my daily involvement in the children's lives, evidence of Tom's manipulation and deception, proof that the children viewed me as their primary father figure despite biology. We'll need character witnesses, school records showing you as the primary contact, medical records with your signature. Most importantly, we'll need the children's preferences, especially the older ones who can articulate their feelings to the court. And the DNA test? Take it. We need official confirmation, even though the results seem obvious. It eliminates any possibility of Tom claiming you're avoiding the truth. The unopened kit seemed to mock me as I returned home. Sarah was at work, the children at school, leaving me alone with the decision that would make everything official. No more hoping I might be wrong. No more clinging to the possibility that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. I opened the kit and followed the instructions, swabbing the inside of my cheek before sealing the sample in its sterile container. Emma, Marcus, Sophie, and Jake's samples would follow, though I dreaded explaining to them why these tests were necessary. 2 weeks for results. 2 weeks before I'd have scientific proof that the family I'd built my life around wasn't really mine at all. The bank statements I'd never bothered to examine closely told a story of systematic deception that left me feeling nauseated. Spread across my home office desk were 5 years of hidden financial records that Sarah had finally surrendered after I threatened to freeze all our accounts. Each page revealed another layer of Tom's manipulation and my own willful blindness. Family liaison consulting, T. Harrison Enterprises, $2,500. The same entry appeared every month for the past 8 years. Deposited into an account I'd never known existed. Sarah's secret income stream, carefully disguised as legitimate business income for tax purposes. Tom had been paying my wife a salary while I believed I was supporting our family. Through my construction work, the children's private school tuition, $48,000 annually for all 4, had been automatically debited from Tom's personal account for 3 years. I'd assumed Sarah was handling the payments from our joint savings, never bothering to verify because I trusted her completely. The family trip to Disney World last Christmas, the one where I'd felt proud to finally afford something special for the kids, had been funded by a bonus payment from Tom's company that I'd never earned. Even our mortgage told the story of my financial inadequacy. The house we'd bought 8 years ago had required a down payment of $80,000. I'd contributed $30,000 from my business earnings, believing Tom's matching funds were a generous gesture between partners. Now I could see that he'd actually paid $50,000, making him the majority investor in what I'd considered my family home. The renovation loan that had transformed our kitchen and added the family room where the kids did. Homework every night bore Tom's signature as the primary borrower. I was listed as a co-signer, which I'd interpreted as a formality. The monthly payments of $1,200 came directly from his business account, not ours. Even the space where my family gathered each evening existed because of his money. Sarah's car, a 3-year-old Honda Pilot she'd claimed we could finally afford after my promotion, was registered under T. Harrison Enterprises as a company vehicle. The insurance, maintenance, and payments all flowed through Tom's accounts. My wife had been driving his car while I congratulated myself on providing transportation for our family, the college funds that had given me such peace of mind. Knowing my children's education was secure were entirely Tom's creation. Not only had he set them up without any contribution from me, but he'd structured them so that only he could authorize withdrawals. In the event of our divorce, the funds would follow him, not the children's primary residence. I found receipts for Emma's violin lessons, Marcus's basketball camp, Sophie's art classes, and Jake's swimming lessons. Hundreds of small expenses that I'd thought were coming from our family budget were actually being paid by Tom. He'd been funding my children's development while I worked 60-hour weeks, believing I was providing for them. The most humiliating discovery was a spreadsheet on Sarah's laptop titled Monthly Expenses, MH Family, had been tracking every dollar spent on our household for years, categorizing expenses like children's activities, educational needs, and family maintenance. We were a line item in his budget, a project he was funding. When Sarah came home from work, she found me surrounded by the evidence of our financial dependence. "How long have you known that I wasn't really supporting this family?" I asked. "Michael, you were supporting us. Your work, your love, your presence. My work barely covered utilities and groceries. Everything else, everything that mattered, came from him." She sat down across from me, tears starting. He wanted to help. He said it was the least he could do since he was sleeping with my wife and raising my children. "God, Sarah, I've been living off my cuckold allowance for 8 years. The family calendar hanging on our refrigerator had become a painful artifact of deception. Tom's handwriting appeared everywhere. Doctor appointments he'd scheduled, parent-teacher conferences he'd marked, school events he'd noted in his distinctive blue ink. While I'd been focused on construction deadlines and project schedules, He'd been managing my children's lives with the attention of a devoted father. Emma confronted me on Thursday morning while I was making coffee, her 16-year-old directness cutting through my attempts to maintain normalcy. "Dad, why has Mom been crying every night this week?" I nearly dropped my mug. Emma had always been perceptive, but I hadn't realized how much the tension in our house was affecting the children. "Your mom and I are going through some things. Adult things. Nothing for you to worry about. Is Uncle Tom moving in with us?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "What makes you ask that?" "He's been here every day after school this week. Yesterday he helped Marcus with his math homework, and he knew exactly which textbook to use and where Marcus keeps his assignments. Mom acted like it was normal, but it felt weird. I watched my eldest daughter through new eyes, seeing her intelligence and her growing awareness of the adult world around her. Emma had Tom's dark hair and his sharp cheekbones, features I'd always attributed to Sarah's side of the family. Now I wondered how I'd missed the resemblance. "Are you and Mom getting divorced?" "Emma, because Marcus asked me the same thing yesterday. And Sophie heard you yelling at Mom Tuesday night, even though you thought we were all asleep." The weight of keeping this secret from them suddenly felt unbearable. They knew something was wrong, but they were filling in the blanks with their own fears and assumptions. Maybe that was worse than the truth. Marcus appeared in the kitchen, still in his pajamas, looking younger than his 14 years. "Dad, are we in trouble?" "Like money trouble?" "Why would you think that?" "Uncle Tom paid for my basketball shoes last week. He said not to tell you because he knew you were stressed about work. But you always buy our stuff." It didn't make sense. The pattern was becoming clear. Tom wasn't just financially supporting our family, he was positioning himself as the reliable provider while making me look inadequate. The children were learning to go to him for things they needed, understanding somehow that he had resources I didn't. Sophie wandered in next, drawn by the conversation. At 12, she was old enough to sense the tension, but young enough to still believe adults could fix anything. "Is Uncle Tom going to be our stepdad?" "Sophie, where did you get that idea?" "Madison's parents got divorced, and then her mom's friend moved in and became her stepdad. Uncle Tom is here more than you are now." The accusation stung because it was partially true. I'd been working longer hours lately, trying to generate enough business income to feel less dependent on the company Tom controlled. While I was scrambling to prove my worth as a provider, he was home with my children, being present for the daily moments that mattered. Jake, only 8, was the last to join our impromptu family meeting. He climbed onto my lap without speaking, sensing the serious mood even if he couldn't understand the conversation. "Are you still going to be our dad?" he asked quietly. The question broke my heart because it revealed that even at 8, Jake somehow understood that my position in this family wasn't secure. Children pick up on more than adults realize, and mine had been living in a house where their father's role was being systematically undermined. Always, I promised. Though I wasn't sure I had the power to make that promise true. The DNA test results arrived on a Friday afternoon, delivered in a plain white envelope that contained the scientific destruction of everything I'd believed about my family. The laboratory letterhead looked official and cold, reducing 15 years of fatherhood to genetic markers and probability percentages. Probability of paternity, 0.0%. The words appeared 4 times, once for each child. Emma Rose Carter, 0.0%. Marcus David Carter, 0.0%. Sophie Ann Carter, 0.0%. Jacob Michael Carter, 0%. No room for doubt, no margin of error, no hope that somehow I might be wrong about Tom's claims. I sat in my truck outside the post office for 20 minutes, staring at the numbers that confirmed my worst fears. The children I'd taught to ride bikes, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose bedtime stories I'd read thousands of times, none of them carried my DNA. Biologically, I was no more related to them than any stranger on the street. But as I drove home, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling more disconnected from Emma, Marcus, Sophie, and Jake, I found myself remembering all the moments that had nothing to do with genetics. Jake's laugh when I pushed him on the swing set. Sophie's pride when she showed me her art projects. Marcus seeking my advice about middle school drama. Emma trusting me with her secrets and fears. Tom might have contributed sperm, but I'd contributed presence. He might share their DNA, but I'd shared their daily lives. He'd been their financial supporter, but I'd been their emotional anchor. The parent they ran to when they were hurt or scared or excited about something new. The support group meeting I'd found online was held in a church basement across town. A circle of folding chairs occupied by men who discovered their children weren't biologically theirs. The facilitator, a gentleman named David, who'd been through his own paternity crisis 5 years earlier, handed me a coffee in a styrofoam cup and introduced me to the group. "First time?" he asked kindly. I nodded, still clutching the DNA results in my jacket pocket. The hardest part is thinking that biology determines everything, said Robert, a man about my age who'd been attending meetings for 2 years. But parenting isn't about who contributed genetic material. It's about who shows up every day. Courts don't always see it that way, added James, whose own custody battle had lasted 3 years. But if you've been their psychological father, the one they depend on emotionally, you have legal standing. Document everything. Every school event, every medical appointment, every moment that proves you're their real dad where it matters. The group shared strategies I'd never considered. Keeping detailed records of daily interactions. Gathering character witnesses who could testify to my parental role. Understanding that the biological father's sudden involvement might actually work against him if it looked like he was trying to disrupt the children's established family structure. What's your biggest fear? David asked me. That Tom will take them away from me. That they'll decide he's better because he can provide things I can't. And what's your biggest strength? I thought about Jake falling asleep in my arms last night, Sophie asking me to help with her science project, Marcus wanting my opinion on which high school courses to take, Emma texting me from friends' houses just to check in. They're mine, I said finally. Not biologically, but in every other way that matters. I'm the father they've known their whole lives. Then fight for that, David said simply. Fight for what you've built together. The home videos scattered across our coffee table told the story of a family built on lies. 15 years of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and summer vacations, all recorded moments that now felt like evidence in a case I never wanted to make. In video after video, Tom appeared alongside us, not as a family friend, but as someone who belonged, someone who had a right to be in our most intimate moments. I'd called this family meeting for Saturday morning, knowing we couldn't postpone the conversation any longer. The children deserved to understand why their world was changing, even if I couldn't shield them from the pain. Emma sat on the couch with her arms crossed, her 16-year-old intuition already sensing that whatever I was about to say would change everything. Marcus fidgeted with his phone, trying to look disinterested but failing to hide his anxiety. Sophie sat close to Sarah, seeking comfort from the parent who'd been keeping secrets. Jake, my youngest, had climbed onto my lap without invitation, his 8-year-old instincts telling him something was wrong. I need to tell you all something important, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. Something that's going to be hard to understand and harder to accept. Are you and Mom getting divorced? Emma asked bluntly. That's one possibility, but first you need to know why. I took a breath, knowing these words would shatter their childhood in ways they might never fully recover from. I found out this week that I'm not your biological father. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Marcus looked up from his phone, confused. Sophie moved closer to Sarah. Jake twisted in my lap to study my face. What does that mean? Sophie asked. It means Uncle Tom is your real father. All of you. Emma's reaction was immediate and fierce. That's not true. You're our dad. You've always been our dad. I will always be your dad in the ways that matter, I said, pulling her close with my free arm. But biologically, genetically, Tom is your father. Your mom and Tom they've had a relationship for many years. Marcus finally understood. Mom cheated on you. With Uncle Tom. Marcus, Sarah started, but he cut her off. This is why he's always here. This is why he acts like he owns us. Marcus's voice cracked with the emotional weight of a 14-year-old trying to process adult betrayal. The front door opened before anyone could respond. Tom walked in like he lived there, which I now realized he essentially did. I thought we agreed to wait, Sarah said to him, her voice strained. They deserve to hear this from both their fathers, Tom replied, sitting in the chair he'd claimed as his own. You're not our father, Emma said with surprising venom. I don't care what some stupid test says. Michael is our dad. Emma, I understand you're upset, Tom began. Don't. Emma stood up, tears streaming down her face. Don't you dare try to parent me right now. You've been lying to us our whole lives. Jake buried his face in my chest, overwhelmed by emotions he was too young to process. Sophie was crying quietly against Sarah's shoulder. Marcus stared at Tom with a mixture of confusion and growing anger. I want him to leave, Emma announced. I want him out of our house. This isn't just your decision to make, Tom said gently but firmly. I know this is shocking, but I'm your biological father. I have rights here. Rights? Marcus stood up, his teenage anger finally finding a target. What about our rights? What about our right to not have our family destroyed by your lies? The family meeting I'd planned to bring understanding had instead brought chaos, confusion, and a battle for my children's loyalty that I wasn't sure I could win. Emma's journal lay open on her desk where I'd found it while helping her look for a missing textbook. The pink leather cover with its tiny lock had been a 13th birthday gift, and I'd never violated her privacy before. But the page it had fallen open to contained my name, and the pain in those handwritten words stopped me cold. I hate them both, she'd written 3 days ago. Mom for lying and Uncle Tom for pretending to be something he's not. Dad is the only real parent I have, and they're trying to take him away from us. I don't care about biology or DNA or any of that stupid science. Michael Carter raised me. He's the one who taught me to drive, who helped with my algebra homework, who stayed up all night when I had pneumonia. Tom Harrison just showed up for the fun parts. Each child was processing the revelation differently, and their reactions were tearing our family apart in ways I hadn't anticipated. Emma had become fiercely protective of me, refusing to speak to Tom when he visited, and openly challenging Sarah's attempts to maintain normalcy. Her loyalty was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. I didn't want her to carry the burden of choosing sides. Marcus was struggling with questions of identity that no 14-year-old should have to face. He'd started asking uncomfortable questions about genetics, wondering if his athletic ability came from Tom, if his math struggles were inherited from a man who'd hidden in plain sight for his entire life. Yesterday, I'd found him staring at himself in the bathroom mirror, cataloging features that might belong to his biological father. "Do I look like him?" Marcus asked when he saw me watching. "You look like yourself," I said, though I could now see Tom's jawline in his face. The same stubborn cowlick that no amount of hair gel could tame. But I have his eyes, don't I? And his hands. Marcus held up his palms, studying them like they belonged to a stranger. Sophie, at 12, wanted everyone to just get along. She'd started having nightmares about our family falling apart and had begun wetting the bed again, a problem we'd solved years ago. Her solution to everything was family dinners that included Tom, as if eating together could somehow make the deception disappear. "Why can't we just be a bigger family?" she asked over breakfast. "Madison has 2 dads because her parents got divorced. Maybe we could have 2 dads without getting divorced." Jake, my youngest, was responding with confusion and regression. He'd stopped sleeping through the night and had become clingy in ways that reminded me of when he was a toddler. He didn't understand the biology or the betrayal. He only knew that the adults in his life were upset and that somehow Uncle Tom had become a source of tension instead of the fun guy who brought presents and played games. Tom's approach to the situation was making everything worse. He'd begun asserting parental authority, correcting the children's behavior and making decisions about their activities without consulting me. When Emma refused to hug him goodbye after his visit yesterday, he'd lectured her about respecting her elders. "I'm not just your elder," he'd said. "I'm your father, and you need to start accepting that reality." "My father is upstairs," Emma replied coldly. "You're just the sperm donor." Sarah was caught between protecting her secret relationship with Tom and maintaining peace with the children. Her attempts to mediate were failing because she couldn't address the fundamental issue, that she'd chosen to lie to everyone for 15 years. The battle for my children's hearts had begun, and I realized that winning might require me to fight harder than I'd ever fought for anything in my life. The company and corporation papers from 15 years ago revealed the extent of Tom's long-term manipulation. Spread across Margaret Walsh's conference table, the documents told a story of systematic positioning that I'd been too trusting to recognize. What I'd interpreted as generous partnership terms were actually carefully crafted legal maneuvers designed to give Tom ultimate control when this day inevitably arrived. "He's been planning this for years," Margaret said, pointing to specific clauses in our original agreement. "Look at Section 12.3. In the event of partnership dissolution due to personal conflicts, the senior partner maintains controlling interest in client relationships and ongoing contracts." I'd signed that document believing Tom and I were equals. That senior partner was just a title reflecting his family's connections in the construction industry. Now I understood it was a legal designation that gave him power to destroy everything I'd worked to build. "Carter Harrison Construction becomes Harrison Construction overnight," she continued. "He can buy out your share at a valuation that's 40% below current market rate, and he retains all business relationships, equipment leases, and pending contracts." The Henderson Shopping Complex project we'd been working on for 8 months. My design, my crew management, my relationships with subcontractors would belong entirely to Tom. The Miller residential development that had been my baby from concept to groundbreaking would transfer to his control. 15 years of reputation and client relationships would vanish because I'd trusted my best friend with legal documents I hadn't fully understood. "What about the equipment?" I asked, thinking about the excavators, trucks, and tools that represented hundreds of thousands of dollars in assets, leased through the company, which he'll control. "Your personal tools and smaller equipment are yours, but everything substantial stays with Harrison Construction." Tom hadn't waited for our legal proceedings to begin asserting his business dominance. Yesterday, he'd called a meeting with our 3 full-time employees, men I'd hired and trained, who'd worked under my direct supervision for years. He'd explained that due to partnership restructuring, he would be taking over day-to-day operations. Mike's going through some personal issues that require his attention, he'd told them, painting my devastation as a choice to step back rather than acknowledging that he was pushing me out. I'll be handling project management and client relations going forward. The most infuriating part was how reasonable he made it sound. Tom had always been better with numbers and paperwork while I focused on the actual construction work. To our employees and clients, his transition to full control would seem like a natural evolution of our partnership rather than a hostile takeover designed to leave me financially dependent on his charity. He's offering me a supervisor position, I told Margaret. $45,000 a year to manage crews on projects I used to co-own. That's insulting, but it might be strategic. If you refuse, he can claim you abandoned the business voluntarily. If you accept, you maintain some income while we fight the dissolution terms. The phone call from our biggest client, Reynolds Development Group, confirmed Tom's strategy. Jack Reynolds had worked with us for 7 years. But when I called to discuss the Oakwood subdivision timeline, his assistant said he'd been instructed to direct all communication through Tom Harrison. Nothing personal. Mike, Jack said when I finally reached him. Tom explained that you're dealing with family problems and won't be available for project coordination. He's assured me that service quality won't be affected. My professional reputation was being systematically dismantled, while Tom positioned himself as the stable, reliable partner who could weather personal storms. The business we'd built together was becoming his weapon against me, ensuring that even if I won custody of the children, I'd lack the financial resources to support them properly. The trap was perfect, and I'd walked into it willingly 15 years ago. The support group meeting flyer had been crumpled in my jacket pocket for a week before I finally worked up the courage to attend. Fathers in Crisis, support group for men navigating paternity and custody challenges, met every Tuesday evening in the basement of St. Mark's Lutheran Church, a circle of folding chairs occupied by men whose lives had been shattered by similar betrayals. David, the group facilitator, welcomed me with the weary kindness of someone who'd walked this path himself. At 52, he'd discovered 5 years ago that his teenage daughter wasn't biologically his, though his ex-wife had known the truth throughout their marriage. His calm demeanor spoke of hard-won wisdom and the kind of healing that comes only after fighting through the deepest pain. First rule, he said, handing me coffee in a styrofoam cup, is that biology doesn't determine fatherhood. The second rule is that the legal system hasn't caught up to that reality yet. Robert, an accountant about my age, had been attending meetings for 2 years after discovering that his twin sons belonged to his brother. The hardest part isn't the betrayal, he said during introductions. It's realizing that everyone around you knew or suspected, and nobody thought you deserved the truth. That observation hit like a physical blow. How many people in our social circle had seen the resemblances I'd missed? How many family gatherings had I attended while others exchanged knowing looks about Tom's involvement with my children? James, whose custody battle had lasted 3 years, offered practical advice that my lawyer hadn't mentioned. Document everything, he said, pulling out a thick folder. Every school pickup, every bedtime story, every scraped knee you bandaged. Courts care about who's been doing the actual parenting, not just who's been writing checks. What about the financial stuff? I asked. Tom's been supporting my family for years. Doesn't that work against me? Only if you let it define your relationship with the kids, replied Marcus, a soft-spoken teacher who'd fought for custody of his daughter after learning her biological father was his wife's co-worker. The judge in my case said that emotional availability matters more than financial contribution, especially when the money was given deceptively. The group shared strategies I'd never considered, keeping detailed journals of daily interactions with the children, gathering character witnesses who could testify to my parental role from teachers, coaches, and neighbors, understanding that Tom's sudden assertion of parental rights after 15 years of secrecy might actually work in my favor. Biological fathers who've been absent or deceptive face scrutiny too, David explained. Courts want stability for children, not upheaval. If your kids are bonded to you and Tom's involvement has been based on lies, that matters. But the most valuable insight came from hearing other men's stories of survival and recovery. Richard had maintained custody of his son despite DNA evidence and was now happily remarried. Paul had rebuilt his relationship with his daughter after she chose to live with him at age 16. Tony had started his own business after his ex-wife's affair partner destroyed their shared company. What's your biggest strength in this situation? David asked me as the meeting wound down. I thought about Emma's fierce loyalty, Marcus seeking my advice despite his confusion, Sophie's nightmares when I wasn't home, Jake falling asleep in my arms every night since the revelation. They need me, I said finally. Not my money or my genetics, but me. The The father who's been there every day for 15 years. Then that's what you fight for, David said. Not because you deserve it, but because they deserve to keep the dad they've always known. Walking to my truck after the meeting, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Sarah's confession. Hope. The legal document drafts spread across. Margaret Walsh's conference table represented my transformation from victim to strategic fighter. After weeks of reeling from Tom's manipulations, I was finally taking control of my situation with a comprehensive plan designed to protect both my relationship with the children and my financial future. We're building a case around psychological parentage, Margaret explained, pointing to the petition she'd drafted. 15 years of consistent primary caregiving establishes you as their de facto father regardless of biology. Tom's recent assertion of parental rights after years of deception actually strengthens your position. The custody strategy focused on the children's best interests rather than parental rights. We documented my daily involvement in their lives, school pickup schedules, medical appointments I'd handled, homework supervision, bedtime routines, weekend activities. The evidence painted a picture of active, engaged fatherhood that contrasted sharply with Tom's role as the fun uncle who showed up for special occasions. Emma's statement is particularly powerful, Margaret said, showing me the sworn affidavit my eldest daughter had insisted on providing. At 16, her preferences carry significant weight, and she's articulated clearly that disrupting her relationship with you would be traumatic. For the business dissolution, we'd found leverage I hadn't expected. Tom's financial manipulation over the years, the secret payments to Sarah, the undisclosed funding of family expenses, the strategic positioning for partnership control, constituted fraud. While I'd been operating in good faith, he'd been systematically deceiving me about the true nature of our business relationship. We're filing for forensic accounting, Margaret explained. Every payment he made to your family, every business decision made under false pretenses, every contract modification you signed without full disclosure of his motives, it all becomes evidence of deceptive practices. The timeline we'd constructed was damning. Tom's increased involvement in my children's lives corresponded directly with strategic business decisions that diminished my control. When Emma started kindergarten, he'd restructured our insurance policies. When Marcus began playing sports, he'd modified our equipment leasing agreements. When Sophie needed tutoring, he'd changed our profit distribution formula. Each act of apparent generosity had been calculated to increase his control while making me more dependent. He's created a paper trail of manipulation spanning 15 years, Margaret said with satisfaction. That works in our favor for both custody and business proceedings. My documentation strategy extended beyond legal requirements. Following the support group's advice, I'd started keeping detailed journals of my daily interactions with each child. Emma's college application process, where she'd specifically requested my help over Tom's. Marcus's basketball games, where he still looked to the stands for my approval, not Tom's. Sophie's art projects that she brought to me first for feedback. Jake's nighttime routine that only worked when I was the one reading stories and checking for monsters under the bed. Character witnesses are crucial, Margaret reminded me. Teachers, coaches, neighbors, anyone who can testify to your primary parental role. Mrs. Henderson from Emma's school had agreed to testify about the countless parent-teacher conferences I'd attended alone. Coach Martinez from Marcus's basketball team confirmed that I'd been the parent handling practice schedules and team communications. Even our pediatrician, Dr. Sarah Kim, had records showing that I'd been the primary contact for medical decisions and emergency situations. The communication strategy was equally important. Tom had been trying to control the narrative with mutual friends and business associates, positioning himself as the responsible party stepping up during my personal crisis. We needed to counter that story with facts about his deception and manipulation. Truth is our strongest weapon, Margaret said. Tom's been lying for 15 years. We just need to make sure everyone understands the scope of his deception. The trap he'd so carefully constructed was about to become his prison. The Christmas photo collection scattered across my parents' kitchen table told the story of Tom's calculated integration into our family over 15 years. In every holiday picture, birthday celebration, and summer gathering, there he was. Not on the periphery like a family friend, but positioned centrally like he belonged there. My mother had been unconsciously documenting evidence of his true relationship with my children for their entire lives. We always wondered, my mother admitted quietly, studying a photo from Jake's 3rd birthday party. Tom was so attentive to the children, so invested in their milestones, but we thought he was just a devoted godfather. My father's reaction was more direct. I knew something was off when he set up those college funds without discussing it with you first. What kind of business partner makes financial decisions about your children without including you? The conversation with my parents had been one of the most difficult of my life, but their response gave me strength I hadn't expected. They were angry, furious at Tom's deception and Sarah's betrayal, but their support for me and the grandchildren they'd loved for 15 years never wavered. Biology doesn't change anything, my mother said firmly. Emma, Marcus, Sophie, and Jake are our grandchildren, period. Tom Harrison can claim DNA all he wants, but he can't claim 15 years of family memories. Sarah's family presented a more complicated situation. When I finally confronted her parents about their knowledge of the affair, their guilty expressions confirmed what I'd suspected. They'd known the truth for years.
Sarah made us promise not to tell, her mother said defensively. She said she was trying to protect everyone, especially the children. Protect everyone except me, I replied. Her father, at least, had the grace to look ashamed. We should have said something, Michael.
You deserved to know, but Sarah convinced us that telling the truth would destroy the family. The revelation that Sarah's entire family had been complicit in the deception added another layer of betrayal. Holiday dinners where they'd watched me interact with my children while knowing the truth. Gift exchanges where they'd smiled at my pride in being a father while harboring Sarah's secret. Years of family photos where they'd positioned Tom naturally among us, understanding his true role while I remained oblivious. Our social circle was splitting along predictable lines. Couples we'd known for years were taking sides, some supporting me as the betrayed husband and devoted father, others suggesting that Tom's biological connection gave him legitimate claims. The gossip mill was running overtime, with our personal crisis becoming neighborhood entertainment. But unexpected support came from surprising sources. Janet Morrison, our next-door neighbor for 8 years, stopped by with a casserole and a character reference letter she'd written without being asked. "I've watched you with those children every day," she said. "Tom might have contributed sperm, but you've been their father. You're the one who taught Emma to parallel park in our driveway. You're the one who helped Marcus build that treehouse. You're the one who walked Sophie to the bus stop every morning for 3 years." The children's relationships with grandparents on both sides had become complicated. My parents remained steadfastly supportive, but Sarah's parents were now torn between their loyalty to their daughter and their genuine affection for the grandchildren they'd helped raise. Tom's parents, who'd been peripheral figures in our lives, were suddenly asserting grandparental rights and demanding visitation schedules. "This is exactly what Tom wanted," I told Margaret during our weekly strategy session. "Maximum disruption, to create instability that makes him look like the reasonable solution. But it's backfiring," she pointed out. "The more chaos he creates, the more obvious it becomes that he's prioritizing his own interests over the children's emotional well-being." The battle lines were drawn, and I was discovering who my real allies were in this fight for my family. The Father's Day cards from years past lay spread across my desk like evidence of a love that transcended biology. Hand-drawn pictures from when they were small, carefully written messages as they grew older, each one signed with variations of "Love your son" or "Love your daughter." The card Jake had made this past Father's Day, just weeks before our world imploded, featured a crayon drawing of us fishing together with the words, "Best Dad Ever," written in his careful 8-year-old handwriting. The children were being forced to navigate an impossible situation, caught between the man who'd raised them and the man whose DNA they carried. Tom's insistence on formal recognition was creating pressure that no child should have to bear, turning family relationships into a competition for loyalty and affection. Emma's position remained unwavering. At 16, she possessed the emotional maturity to understand the full scope of what had happened, and her anger at Tom's manipulation burned with protective fury. "He wants me to call him Dad," she told me after his latest visit. "He says it would help everyone adjust to the new reality. I told him that you're my dad, that biology is just science class, and that if he keeps pushing this, I'll ask the court to let me choose where I live." Her fierce loyalty both warmed and worried me. Emma was sacrificing her own emotional needs to protect mine, taking on adult responsibilities in defending our family structure. I didn't want her to feel responsible for holding everything together, but her clarity about what mattered gave me strength. Marcus was struggling more visibly with questions of identity and belonging. At 14, he was old enough to understand genetics, but young enough to be confused about what it all meant for his sense of self. "Do you think I'm more like you, or more like him?" he asked during one of our evening talks. "I mean, I know I have his DNA, but I learned how to throw a football from you. I got my work ethic from watching you manage construction crews. But maybe my math problems come from his genes? You're Marcus Carter, I told him firmly. You're the kid who practices free throws until dark every night, who helps your little brother with his homework, who volunteers to help elderly neighbors with yard work. Those traits don't come from DNA. They come from the values we've taught you and the choices you make every day. Sophie, at 12, continued advocating for family unity through willful denial of reality. She'd started referring to Tom as my other dad in conversations, as if having two fathers was perfectly normal and everyone should just accept the arrangement. Madison has two dads since her parents divorced, she reminded me regularly, and Connor has a stepdad who takes him fishing. Why can't we all just get along? Her naive optimism broke my heart because it reflected her desperate need for stability. Sophie wanted to love both of us without choosing sides, but Tom's legal maneuvering was making that impossible. Jake, my youngest, responded to the chaos with simple, devastating honesty. When Tom tried to establish new bedtime routines during his court-ordered visits, Jake would cry for me. When Tom bought him expensive toys, Jake would bring them to me for approval before playing with them. "Are you still going to live with us?" he asked me one evening as I tucked him into bed. "I'm going to try my hardest to make sure we stay together," I promised. "Good," he said, wrapping his small arms around my neck. "Because you're my real daddy, and I don't want a different one." Their choices were clear, even if the legal system might not honor those preferences. They'd chosen me as their father long before anyone started talking about DNA tests and custody arrangements. The court custody documents represented everything I was fighting for: the legal recognition of 15 years of devoted fatherhood. Judge Patricia Henley presided over the hearing with the weary competence of someone who'd seen too many families torn apart by betrayal and deception. The manila folder containing our case sat before her like a verdict waiting to be delivered. Margaret had prepared me for this moment, but sitting across from Tom and his legal team still felt surreal. The man I'd trusted with my business, my family, and my deepest secrets now sat with his attorney, arguing that biology trumped everything I'd given to Emma, Marcus, Sophie, and Jake. "Your Honor," Tom's lawyer began, "my client has been systematically excluded from formal recognition as these children's father despite providing substantial financial support and maintaining consistent emotional involvement throughout their lives." The irony was breathtaking. Tom was positioning his deception as victimhood, his manipulation as generosity, his betrayal as sacrifice. Margaret's response was precise and devastating. Mr. Harrison's so-called support was provided deceptively, without Mr. Carter's knowledge or consent. He systematically undermined my client's role as primary parent while conducting a 15-year affair with the children's mother. The evidence we'd compiled painted a clear picture. School records showing me as the primary emergency contact. Medical forms bearing my signature for routine care and emergency decisions. Teacher testimonials about my involvement in parent conferences and school activities. Neighbor statements about daily caregiving responsibilities I'd handled alone. Emma's testimony, delivered via closed-circuit television to protect her privacy, was the most powerful moment of the hearing. "Tom Harrison might be my biological father," she said with remarkable composure for a 16-year-old. "But Michael Carter is my dad. He's the one who taught me to drive, helped with homework every night, stayed up when I was sick and supported my dreams. Changing that relationship now would be cruel and unnecessary." Marcus, despite his confusion about identity, supported Emma's position. "I know Tom is my biological father, but I don't want to live with him. Michael is the dad I've always known." Sophie's statement was heartbreaking. "I just want our family to stay together. I love both dads, but I want to live with Michael because he's always been my daddy." Jake's simple words carried the most weight. "Michael is my daddy. I don't want to live anywhere else." Judge Henley reviewed the business dissolution separately but concurrently. Margaret's forensic accounting had revealed the systematic financial manipulation Tom had employed. The court ruled that his undisclosed payments to Sarah constituted fraud, voiding several partnership modifications made under false pretenses. Mr. Harrison's pattern of deception extends beyond personal relationships into business practices, Judge Henley stated. His manipulation of partnership agreements while concealing material information about his motives constitutes breach of fiduciary duty. The custody ruling prioritized the children's established relationships and emotional stability. Tom was granted visitation rights as the biological father, but I retained primary custody as their psychological parent. These children have known Mr. Carter as their father for their entire lives, the judge concluded. Disrupting that relationship would not serve their best interests, regardless of biological connections. The business was awarded to me with Tom receiving fair market value. For his partnership stake, minus damages for fraudulent practices. Justice, it seemed, still existed. The new house keys felt heavy in my palm, not from their physical weight, but from everything they represented. Freedom, independence, and a fresh start built on truth rather than deception. The 4-bedroom, colonial on Maple Street, wasn't as large as our previous home, but it was ours. Purchased with my business buyout money and financed through my own credit, free from Tom's financial manipulation. Emma helped me hang family photos in the living room, carefully selecting images that represented our real family unit. The pictures from our old house had felt tainted, contaminated by the knowledge of Tom's hidden presence in every celebration. These new walls would hold only authentic moments: Emma's graduation photos, Marcus's basketball team pictures, Sophie's art projects, Jake's school performances. "This feels right," Emma said, stepping back to admire our work. "Like we're finally ourselves again." The children had adapted to their new living arrangement better than I'd hoped. Emma thrived on the honesty and stability, no longer walking on eggshells around family secrets. Marcus found peace in understanding that his identity wasn't defined by genetics, but by the values and relationships he chose to embrace. Sophie gradually accepted that sometimes families change shape, but love remains constant. Jake simply enjoyed having his daddy all to himself during bedtime stories and weekend adventures. Carter Construction, my business, rebuilt from the ground up, was finding its footing. Without Tom's connections, I'd had to work harder to establish new client relationships, but the freedom to operate with complete integrity made every success more meaningful. The Miller family's deck project, the Rodriguez kitchen renovation, the Thompson basement finishing, each job was proof that I could provide for my family through honest work and genuine skill. Sarah's adjustment had been more difficult. The court had granted her limited custody, recognizing that her deception had damaged her credibility as a primary caregiver. She'd been forced to find her own apartment and a job, her first in 15 years, learning to live independently after decades of financial support from both Tom and me. "I know I can't undo what I did," she said during one of our stilted conversations about visitation schedules, "but I hope someday you can forgive me for the sake of the children." "Forgiveness isn't about you," I replied. "It's about me choosing not to carry anger that would poison my relationship with our kids." Tom's relationship with the children developed slowly and awkwardly during his court-ordered visitation times. Without the comfortable familiarity of Uncle Tom, he struggled to establish genuine connections. The children were polite, but distant, treating him like a well-meaning stranger rather than a father figure. "It's weird," Marcus confided after a weekend visit. "He tries so hard to be a dad, but he doesn't really know us. Like, he bought me a baseball glove, but I play basketball. He means well, but he's basically starting over." Dating again felt strange after 15 years of marriage, but I'd started seeing Lisa, a teacher at Sophie's school who'd provided character testimony during my custody hearing. Our relationship was built on honesty from the beginning, a refreshing change from the lies that had defined my marriage. The healing was gradual but real. The new family photo sat on our mantel, taken on our terms in our new home, representing everything we'd fought to preserve and rebuild. Emma, Marcus, Sophie, Jake, and I stood together on our front porch, genuine smiles replacing the forced happiness of our previous family portraits. This picture told the truth. We were a family bound by choice, commitment, and love that had survived the ultimate test. 1 year had passed since Sarah's devastating confession, and the healing was evident in ways both large and small. Emma had graduated high school as valedictorian, her acceptance speech thanking my dad, Michael Carter, who taught me that integrity matters more than biology. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for her academic achievements. It was recognition of a young woman who'd navigated impossible circumstances with grace and wisdom beyond her years. Marcus had found his balance, understanding that, while Tom's DNA might flow through his veins, his character had been shaped by 15 years of watching me work, struggle, and prioritize family above everything else. His relationship with Tom had evolved into something resembling friendship, polite, cordial, but without the deep emotional connection that defines a father-son bond. "I know who raised me," Marcus said simply when asked about having 2 fathers. "That's what matters." Sophie had stopped trying to force everyone to get along, accepting that sometimes families don't fit traditional molds, but can still be whole and healthy. Her artwork now featured our family of 5 rather than the larger group she'd once drawn, and her nightmares had disappeared as stability returned to our home. Jake called me dad without hesitation or confusion, his relationship with Tom limited to occasional visits that felt more like interactions with a distant relative than a parent. At 9, He was old enough to understand the basic situation, but young enough to simply accept that Michael Carter was his father in every way that mattered. The business continued to grow, built on reputation and referrals rather than family connections. Each successful project reinforced my confidence that I could provide for my family through honest work and genuine relationships. The financial independence felt better than any luxury Tom's money had ever purchased. Sarah and Tom's relationship had ended 6 months after the court proceedings, the weight of their deception and the destruction it had caused finally overwhelming whatever connection they'd shared. Sarah was learning to build a life based on truth rather than lies, while Tom had moved to another state, perhaps seeking a fresh start away from the wreckage of his calculated betrayal. My relationship with Lisa had deepened into something real and lasting, built on complete honesty about our pasts and hopes for the future. The children adored her, appreciating her genuine care for them rather than any hidden agenda. Family isn't about DNA, I told Jake one evening as I tucked him into bed. It's about who shows up every day, who loves you when you're difficult, and who fights for you when the world gets tough. Like you do for us? He asked. Exactly like that. If you've ever questioned the foundation of everything you believed in, remember this. The bonds we choose are often stronger than the ones we inherit. Truth may shatter everything, but it also creates space for something better to grow.